Okay. Hello, Paul. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Hi, Kate. Thank you for
Uh,
having me.
yeah. So, a bit of a heavy subject. We are going to be talking about the Lucy Letby case. And as to whether or not there's a chance she's innocent, which might sound scandalizing and horribly conspiratorial, but actually, uh, in preparation for this interview, I've read articles from The Guardian, The Independent, Al Jazeera, BBC, and The Spectator that all acknowledge reasonable doubt. So this is no longer just a fringe opinion. This is becoming mainstream. And indeed, last week, Sir David Davis talked about this in Parliament. You've been convinced of her innocence from the beginning. Is that correct?
Actually, I was a doubter. I thought, here we have a mad, bad nurse like the previous Beverly Owlett case. I just saw things in the media. A nurse was murdering babies and it was coming up for trial, and then she got convicted. So I was reading about it then for about a year before I started writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning, I didn't know if she was guilty or innocent. I just saw everybody saying she's mad and bad. And then as I researched, I couldn't really see any evidence, not only for her guilt, but also of any wrongful deaths. There's no evidence that any of the babies were murdered. And that's a theme that's come up throughout the whole case. So they could easily have died of natural causes, as the coroners and pathologists said they did. It's only when this kind of rogue expert witness, Dewey Evans, has come on the scene that he said, oh, if they didn't die of one thing, it must have been something else. And he's kind of made plausible reasons for the baby's deaths, but they weren't thought to be that way for many years. So it's all a bit of a strange can of worms, as you say.
Why were you compelled to start researching it to begin with?
Partly because I am a neonatal intensive care nurse, and I could see how this could easily happen to anyone at any place, because every day there's possibly preventable deaths of babies, including in maternity. There's all these reports showing in the UK, reports by Ockenden, Francis, and Bill Kirkup. They've shown, for example, one hospital having 50 deaths of babies that were preventable. And if you're the person on duty caring for them, doing the best you can make a mistake. You're not killing a baby on purpose. You could be let down by your management there, that you've got lack of resources of staff, equipment, sanitation. As we know in Countess of Chester, the sanitation
Mhm.
had terrible Pseudomonas
That's come
bacterial
out quite
infection.
recently, hasn't it?
No, I think that's always been known, because the only expert witness in the defense was the plumber. And he said sanitation's coming out. Whether they identified that particular bug at any particular time, maybe you're correct, it might be more recent. But a lot of stuff's been known for years, and it was blamed one person. And really, when we start looking at why did she get blamed, there's a lot of reasons, whether they appear to be conspiracy reasons or hard and fast facts. I've worked in so many units that if somebody gets the displeasure of those with the power and control, usually the consultants, they get pushed out. And in this case, it looked like they tried to get rid of Lucy Letby to move her to another hospital or get her onto desk job somewhere else. She went to work in the risk department. And they were shocked and horrified. Not only she was coming back to work with them, they had to write a written apology because she won her personal grievance employment case against them for how they treated her. And then they may not have maliciously or even planned a case against her, but circumstances all came together for a perfect storm where it was easy to blame one nurse. And so that could be me, that could be so many other nurses or doctors doing the best they can.
So, first, please tell me what she was convicted of, because I know what she was convicted of. People are of the opinion that's actually just the tip of the iceberg. And then from there, I'm going to go through the evidence, quote unquote, and you can tell me your opinions on that evidence.
I'm sorry to hear that some people might think that's the tip of the iceberg when I think it's in reverse.
Mhm.
But yes, you're correct that the police are investigating other possible deaths and whether they were attributable, in theory, to Lucy Letby. Um, I think that's part of the police just picking up their case and justifying the budgets and all the other things. Sorry, I've lost track of your question
She
now.
was convicted of
Oh, yeah.
seven.
So there's 7 murders, and I think 6 or 7 attempted murders,
Mhm.
and an extra one was added a year after. So there were 6, and then the 7th one was added a year later. And the strong argument against me is a jury convicted her.
Mhm.
But I would say to that is if you almost hypnotize, I call it magical realism, very
Mhm.
much the emperor's clothes. It's even a collective way of thinking. If you're in a room, in a courtroom, and some of the journalists, like for the BBC, some have written the book Unmasking Lucy Letby, they're persuaded by a picture in front of them of Lucy sat there quietly, and they say, "Oh, look, she's evil." So it's all projection
Yeah.
onto somebody. There's no evidence, there's no facts. And I focus on both because I do legal work. I've represented nurses, midwives, doctors in employment, regulatory. I've also been involved in some criminal cases and done expert witness reports. I was invited by the police to write expert witness reports for Constance Martin, whose baby died in Brighton, and there was a big hunt for this, and others. And when I showed that I wasn't likely to write in favour of the police, I was writing in favour of the mother of a baby, they dropped me and they got people that would go along with their narrative. So she was convicted of the murders and attempted murders on no evidence clinically or legally. It's all circumstantial.
Okay.
And one of the latest things that's come out is this she was accused of hurting a baby's liver, causing it to bleed. And the jury were not told that a doctor had inserted a needle.
Okay, so
So there's a
this is where I want to go on to. I want to tell you the reasons. Well, I'm aware that you know them, but we're going to now go through uh, things that pointed to a guilty woman. So first of all, it is she was accused and prosecuted for force feeding babies to death by feeding them with milk, uh, insulin poison. She beat up a baby or trauma, and
that's the liver one, the
the
bleeding,
liver,
yeah, and
and
air embolisms,
there's one more
injecting
thing she did as well, right?
injecting air
Air into the stomach. So what
and air into the bloodstream.
so why do you do what's your issue with these?
That they're quite ridiculous. If we start with the last one, air into the bloodstream, the expert witness for the prosecution shifted from saying air into the stomach to air into the bloodstream, neither of which have any evidence or could be proven. I
Yes.
could say that you were drunk driving your car yesterday. How are you going to defend it? You can't. So somebody can say this nurse injected air 3 years ago into a baby's bloodstream. How can she defend it? Well, it's the opposite. They should have to prove. And this is the worrying trend. I'm dealing with other cases, including in other countries. The trend is the allegations become evidence. They're
Okay.
treated as evidence. So it's also ridiculous to inject air so much into the belly. Now, we used to inject on purpose a little bit of air, listen to it to see if we could hear a gurgle, and we would know it was in the stomach, not the lungs. We were trained to do this before every single feed. So it wasn't wrong some
Mhm.
years ago. It became, it's not a good idea, better stop doing it. There's some research against that. But if a baby is overventilated on a mechanical ventilator machine with either continuous positive airway pressure, that's a small, gentle bit, or positive ventilation, that's quite a large bit. If the rate is too fast or the pressure is too high, the
Mhm.
lungs flow so much they push the other organs down and the liver is lower down. So when the doctor, as we now know during Thirlwell inquiry, it's revealing lots of useful evidence, a doctor has kind of admitted, it's Dr. Stephen Breary, the lead consultant, that he thought he would let some of the gas out of the belly by putting a needle in. And there seems to be a medical mistake. Maybe it's medical negligence, but why cover it up? And this is what's almost sinister about this case, that nobody went to support this nurses
Yep.
against the allegations. They piled on. So the other thing's insulin. We would usually have it closely monitored how and where it's stored, when it's used. You have to check a drug with somebody else. If somebody had access to it, drew some up, injected it into a bag, that's plausible. But again, there's zero evidence. There's no
But
bag,
isn't
no
this the
testing.
point in general that there's zero evidence, but it's all adding up? So for example, isn't it true? that
So you can do that with anything.
a baby was 30 times more likely to die when Lucy was on shift. I think that's the statistic I read.
Wow. Um, so the great danger with statistics, and that's why it's great that people like Richard Gill, who's on other podcasts, Sonia Paulson and various places, and he helped a 5-year case, similar, almost identical to this one, in the Netherlands, the Dutch nurse who was jailed, Sonia de Burke, and she was released, but it took 5 years. Statistical evidence, you could so easily, lots of things you can say, oh, there's a doubling in chance. We didn't look at the full picture of how many babies died in the unit. For example, today, the Thirlwell Inquiry published some results or conclusions saying 15 babies died in that period. They're not attributing them all to Lucy. You could say the police might try to do that, but if they died of natural causes, or did they die of any unnatural causes? Who else is liable or responsible?
Okay.
Trouble with the statistics is it's too easy to say, oh, she worked a larger number of hours on shift, therefore there's a greater probability of her being on shift when a baby dies or has a collapse. Also, the door swipe information was reversed and completely incorrect and unreliable, showing sometimes she wasn't there, she wasn't on duty when they thought she was.
Wouldn't they?
So,
You wouldn't
yeah,
just be relying on door swabs for that, though. Wouldn't there be a log of rotas?
well, you can have a log of rotors and somebody goes sick, but the door swipe was thought to be more accurate. There was also a back door that had a PIN code. Parents and others would come in, more than one person with one swipe anyway. But the problem is the CPS, Crown Prosecution, admitted they had it reversed, they got it wrong after the trial. So back to the jurors being
Mm-hmm.
hypnotized with information that was actually misinformation.
Yep.
Was not on duty for some of those deaths. Yes, what if she injected it into a bag that was later given to a baby? Again, there's no evidence. When you say all the circumstantial adds up, if somebody said, well, your tires are bald on your car, your engine's faulty, this, how are you going to disprove all these things? It doesn't mean it's any more true just to add more allegations. There
Let's
has to be
let's go
evidence.
let's go through more of what was levied against her. Um,
Yeah.
what about the facts that a doctor saw her standing over a baby whilst the baby was dying and Lucy was not responding?
Okay. So that doctor has no credibility in himself and in his evidence. I
Okay.
use the term oxymoron. If you say I caught you virtually red-handed, dislodging the baby's breathing tube in that case, virtually means he didn't. She wasn't doing it. If now that doctor was meant to be doing a ward round twice a day, and he did them once a week. That doctor had a pop group and a media online presence in BBC and other television appearances. So he had other occupations. I've been working in units. We cannot get the consultants to answer their page or the phone because they're busy doing private work and things. So I think he's deflecting his own responsibility, saying, well, I caught her virtually red-handed and this will live in my nightmares for the rest of my life. But he did nothing about it for about a year or more. So why, if he thought she was really doing something harmful?
Has
I
has
would
he
never put
faced consequences for witnessing an attempted murder and doing nothing?
no.
No. Is this the doc? I know this seems like a tangent, but
Anyway,
is this the
it's Ravi
doctor
J.
that Lucy supposedly had a crush on?
No, that is Ravi J. Ram.
Okay.
And again, even the crush thing is almost like sensationalized media things. There's zero evidence. There's
So what
some.
was the tell me more about this crush and why it was used against her.
I just think it's silly. Again, if we're talking about evidence
Okay,
in
but
a
I'm just trying to just for people who aren't aware.
that it's inevitable when you're working the same with the families. You form close relationships, friendly
Yeah.
relationships. And with today's technology, people are WhatsApp messaging each other. So
Okay.
there's a very large number of WhatsApp messages, and they even happen to be on the same trip, go to London
Yeah.
once
So
or
so so Lucy supposedly had a crush on this doctor. I'm just bringing it up because it's used as a if you watch psychology videos online, one of the
yeah.
main theories people have is that every time a baby died, Lucy got attention from this doctor.
Okay, yeah, yeah, fair
Right.
enough.
Now,
Yeah,
listen, I don't believe that that has any gives any
It's okay
credibility. But
to explore anything.
I'm just wanting to acknowledge that this is a theory for why Lucy did it.
Yeah. Again, there are theories, whether they're plausible, I think still comes down to evidence. And there is the term Munchausen by proxy. A
Yes.
mother might make a child sick, she goes to the doctor, the child gets attention, and so does the mother. And actually, Dewey Evans, the expert witness in this case, has a whole bunch of mothers against him because he said many mothers harmed their children without any evidence. So again, whether or not she had a crush on somebody and whether she got attention or not, is that going to motive? So we don't have any motive for
Yeah.
Lucy Letby
Well, we're
killing
all
any
adults.
babies.
We've all had a crush.
Yeah, but would we kill a baby, a
No,
vulnerable
of
premature
course.
baby, to get their attention?
It's a strange thing to hold against someone, is what I meant. So I'm going to ask two more
Yeah.
questions, and then we can talk about the broader implications. The first is, tell me about Lucy essentially admitting to guilt in these notes that were found in her home. That's pretty
Okay, that
damning,
question.
surely.
No, occupational health therapy nurse encouraged her to write down thoughts and feelings and anything. I don't know if you've ever sat in a jail for 24 hours in a prison cell, been arrested. Lucy Letby was arrested, I think 3 times, but several times anyway, taken by police, high profile with media attending the arrests, a bit like the Cliff Richard when they searched his premises. And by the way, Cliff Richard won a very successful legal action against the police for conspiring with the media, the BBC in that case, to cover it from helicopters. And he won a very large damages. So Lucy Letby's privacy was also breached in the same kind of way. Um, Sorry, I've lost my thread. Redirect me.
Her private notes were read by
Oh, yeah.
police.
So the therapist encouraged her to write things down. And I'm saying that a very damaged, traumatized person who's been sitting in police cells, having the witch hunt against her, is like, have I done anything bad or wrong? And I'll tell you, as a clinician, I ask myself every day, could I have done better? Could I do something different? What if I'm wrong about my treatment for this particular person or baby? And it's quite good that she's written down what she's done in that way, but it's cannot be taken as a confession. There's lots of legal rules of evidence about confessions. This does not fit them, but it fits a media frenzy hysteria to say,
Mhm.
oh, look, she did it, she's confessed. They're not confession notes, they're therapy notes.
My final question before we talk about what this means for the nursing community in general, or just the justice system in general, is
Both.
do you think it's appropriate? It possibly it is, but a lot of the parents were saying that it almost seems that when their baby had died, Lucy was making it about that herself. She was writing them cards, adding them on
Yeah.
Facebook.
I,
What's
I
all that
study
about?
this psychology, the carer, who cares for the carer, and why does a carer even become a carer? And to some extent, carers can be very good, efficient, caring members of the medical team. And there is sometimes there's black humor, but there's needs, and sometimes those needs need to be recognized. You get a qualification that gives you recognition. You develop intensive care extra qualification, get extra recognition. So there can be some ego attached to that. There can be a way of processing your feelings, of even saying, "Oh, don't come to work today. It's terrible. Why is it terrible? Well, another baby's died." Um, it's just letting off steam. And before we had messaging like this, it wouldn't be recorded and written down. Somebody would pass someone in the corridor and say, "Oh, I feel a bit terrible." Now, these are people working often throughout 24-hour shift patterns, lack of sleep, high intensive focus on a baby. Something's gone wrong, a baby's died. It's not about them, it is about the mother, father, and the baby and their siblings, their whole family. But it's inevitable that nurse has feelings almost familial, of like they've lost somebody themselves. And there's a balance. Some people manage that better and worse than others, or in different ways. I shouldn't say better and worse, just differently.
Yeah.
So that was how she measured it and
But
how she's
there's
judged.
there are better and worse in that some ways are appropriate and some are not.
Yeah, and easy to judge what's appropriate from outside the situation. If you go and work these shifts, but also I mentioned, if being arrested is having people say she's the angel of death or nurse death. Um, it sort of puts her under pressure. So I think, again, that's not evidence of any wrongdoing. And that's what the alarm is for nurses around the country and other caring professions.
Absolutely. So, you're very convinced by her innocence, but for myself, it's not. For me, it's not that I'm convinced that she's innocent. It's just that I'm not convinced that it was a fair trial. Um,
Yeah.
and what do you think of that?
I'm happy to say, what if I'm wrong and she's guilty? If she harmed somebody, even if she had, which I don't think she has, the trial was not a fair trial, as you say. There's
And
so
this
much
is the
wrong.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an unsafe conviction. But once you've got an unreliable witness with unreliable evidence, like Dr. Brewery and J-Ram saying and missing out about the kidney,
Yeah.
the liver rather, nobody mentioned about this liver. The insulin levels saying from a machine that says this machine is not giving reliable results, do not count on it. You must test it on another machine. You must do repeated ones to see trend. That was all ignored. But for those doctors to be unreliable and their evidence is not good, in fact, they've perverted the course of justice, they've committed perjury, and things are coming out in the inquiry that show they withheld key relevant details.
It,
And we've seen a big landmark case in the UK about rape, that where the prosecution hold back good defence information, the trial is a mistrial. This, the jury were misdirected, the judge misdirected them. It appears the judge thought she was guilty. Even her own defence barrister appears to have thought she was guilty because he didn't have any expert witnesses, which is a fundamental basic. You know, I could have been an expert witness and already would have discounted so much of the evidence.
do you
I don't
think
know why that happened.
do you think the doctors um, and the trust, they are this is because of a misunderstanding or incompetence, or do you think there is something malicious at play?
I don't think it starts out as malicious, but I think it becomes protect yourself, sometimes protect your reputation of the hospital, and things gathered together. So it was in everyone's benefit for the doctors to get together. And they were very lucky from their point of view to get an expert witness saying, well, maybe she injected air, maybe she injected insulin. They're like, yes, maybe she did, maybe she's terrible. Oh, thank goodness nobody's pointing the finger at us. Because if it wasn't for Lucy Letby, they could well be in jail themselves. That's J. Ram Brewery and the other doctors. And actually, the expert witnesses should be liable. There is liability in law
Mm-hmm.
for expert witnesses, and parents could be challenging them. It's tragic what the parents have gone through, but they've
Yeah.
been told their babies have been murdered when probably they haven't. And the expert witness is an idiot, this Dewey Evans, because he's changing his view. He doesn't have evidence for what he's saying. The word idiot is emotional, but I mean illogical. The
Mm-hmm.
law requires logical analysis of things, and it's not there. And we've got a presumption of guilt, understandably, with the inquiry, but that's a failure. The inquiry could and should have been wider to look at the safety of babies in the neonatal units.
How
Because what have
how
we learned from this?
how is
All
it
we've learned,
allowed that Lucy was charged if there was essentially no evidence and it was just a pile of coincidences? How is that
it's
allowed?
been it's been conflated, particularly because of the expert witness appeared credible. And when he said maybe she did insulin, maybe she attacked the baby, punctured the liver, maybe she injected air both into the vein and into the stomach. And they said, oh, now one of the hypnosis aspects is the doctor being godlike. When a doctor, a nice, old, kind, retired doctor who's an expert in his area, or so they thought, says, I think all this, now, the education for a police officer is much less than for a doctor. Even judges who have a fantastic education in law
Yeah,
look up to doctors. So
yeah.
when they're told something to a doctor, I've got other cases. If we had had in Lucy Letby's case an equal number or more experts on her side,
Mm-hmm.
that would be quality and quantity of experts that would discount the prosecution evidence. Because that was missing, it was very easy to have one story, one narrative by a pretty rogue expert witness. And he got a couple of other colleagues to agree with him, and they equally are not very credible.
Do you think this demonstrates a bias against nurses in the doctor nursing community?
I think it's a subconscious bias, yeah, of
Yeah.
hierarchy. And the word hierarchy, we've got an authoritarian rule in hospitals, and that is why mothers and babies die all the time. So somebody's at the bedside, they could do something to help. and a doctor at a distance is saying, no, don't do that, or do something else, and it's harmful, and they're not there taking responsibility. Because of the authoritarian hierarchy, there's preventable deaths and serious injuries to mothers and babies all the time, every day, every unit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not every day, but every unit, almost every day.
Potentially every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long has Lucy been in prison now?
She's been in prison for 3 years, 2 years leading up to the case, just over a year since the case, the conviction. Um, the CCRC, the Criminal Cases Review Committee, is rubbish. You know, it's underfunded and
Yep.
dysfunctional, probably toxic. And as we saw with Birmingham 6, Guildford 4, Camberwell, all the other cases, there's so many other miscarriages of justice where we said, look, the jury got it right, that's the end of the case. And the jury got it wrong because they were misdirected. It's
Yeah.
not their fault, they're quite innocent. If people are playing games, which adversarial law is about playing games, they will show one hand and hide the other hand. You know, so the prosecution was very adept. They had greater funding. They had, I think, 2.5 million, and the defense had about 1.5 million. A total of 4 million was spent just on the case. Since then, we've got Thirlwell, tens of millions. The police have been invested with tens of millions when they didn't have money to investigate at the beginning. The medical facility's been knocked down and a new one. So it's a bit weird. There may not be a direct conspiracy, but there's an indirect one in the subconscious. And it's generally based around fear and control instead of kindness. So the impact on nurses, you asked, years ago, we have a 60% loss of midwives within the first 3 years of qualifying. I'm not sure what it is for nurses, it's similar. So huge, over half of nurses and midwives will leave within a few years of training because, not because the work's hard or night shift, but because they're treated badly.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of kindness. The one solution would be kindness. I've worked in other units, Australia, New Zealand. They've got law on the ratio of how many you look after and how you're treated, a lot stronger employment laws, a lot more kindness and good leadership. So I see we've got 10 minutes left.
Uh,
If we
I,
had more
I'm,
kindness, we would have less cases like this.
my final question to you, Paul, and thank you so much for talking to me today. I'm going to link your book in the description.
Thank you.
Um, where do you think Lucy will be in 5 years' time?
Out of jail.
You believe that in 5 years' time
Very
this will be
comfortable.
resolved?
Yeah. David Davis's speech was very, very good. I saw some criticism by some journalists. There's no foundation for the criticism. They said he's using the protected space of Parliament, where you have privilege and you're able to say things. It was a fantastic speech. And because there's momentum, there is power in the Home Office who set the CCRC up. They could actually themselves say this is an unsafe conviction, either get it quashed with another retrial. I think if it went to a retrial, another judge looking at the facts, even the Court of Appeal have indicated that J-Ram's evidence was not only unsound, but there's questions to ask about him providing unsound evidence. And they've indicated that when they turned her down before. Their rationale might look very thorough and good. There's lots of flaws in the Court of Appeal's rationale. It needs to be tested in a court soon, hopefully within 1 year or a little longer. And everybody will see this was an unsafe conviction, a wrongful miscarriage of justice.
Okay, Paul, thank you. Well, Lucy's certainly got someone on her side. Thank you
Thank you
very
for
much,
listening.
Paul.